Jayek Minogizget. I hope you're having a wonderful day and welcome back to our Braiding Sweetgrass book club. It has really evolved now, hasn't it? I started out just doing Indigenous Author Monday, wanting to spotlight different Indigenous authors with legit Indigenous books because I just felt like there wasn't enough um, focus or spotlight on Indigenous authors. So I felt drawn and pulled to use my platform to announce to the world that we're here, there's authors here, and check out this book. And then it just evolved. And then I found Braiding Sweetgrass by my own tribe's Robin Wall Kimmerer. And I fell in love not only with the book, but with Robin. And it has helped me evolve in my thinking, my understanding, and so much healing that it just turned into a book club. And I think it's something I'll keep going for a while. I already have a list of books that we'll be reviewing, and I hope you all join me on this journey and we can help each other on this journey. So welcome, welcome. Like I always do before we get started is I smudge. I have a glass of water. It's kind of warm today, so I just have water. I don't have hot tea. I try to make it so I'm not trying to multitask at the same time, that I can focus just on the book and what we're discussing. And when you have kids or chores or life, it can be hard to do. So I do whatever I can do to stay centered and focused. And I encourage you to do the same thing. If you're not Indigenous or you don't smudge, whatever works for you, for your culture and your beliefs. If you're a Christian, say a prayer, whatever you do to stay focused. If you're Jewish, if you're agnostic, atheist, whatever you got to do to be in the moment. For me, it's smudging and just taking a couple deep breaths. So I've already smudged. Now we're going to take a couple deep breaths together. Nice. Okay, let's begin. Okay, so we're starting at sitting in a circle, and it starts on page 223. And just the second paragraph alone kind of resonated with me, and so I want to read that. Most of our students come to the Cranberry Lake Biological Station with effervescent enthusiasm, but there are always a few who arrive with only resignation to endure a 5 weeks away from the wired world, a graduation requirement. Over the years, the demeanor of the students has become a pretty good mirror for the changing relationships to nature. They used to arrive motivated by childhoods filled with camping or fishing or messing about in the woods. Today, while their passion for wilderness has not diminished, they now report that their inspiration comes from Animal Planet or the National Geographic Channel. More and more often, the reality of nature outside the living room takes them by surprise. And that really resonated me, and I think it will probably resonate with you too. Our childhoods are just different. I grew up outside all of the time. You know, when the street lights came on, you knew to come home. But it was just a different life. And then camping was like something that was always done. Sleeping in a tent, sometimes not sleeping in a tent, sleeping outside, cooking over the fire. And we did the same thing with our children, but they had the Animal Planet. So they had more exposure to the entire globe, more than we did from, you know, PBS, Mr. Rogers, and Sesame Street. They had Animal Planet, and the Crocodile Hunter, it was my daughter's favorite. And so they had this more global perspective. And in some ways that's amazing because we live on this huge planet that's full of diversity in so many ways, different cultures, animals, climates, so many different things. But then sometimes you're surprised when you go outside your door and it doesn't fit that picture that you saw on TV. So although I feel like it's amazing and it's such a good thing, at the same time, like they have to get out there, get the kids out there, get the students out there. And so when I read also that it's a 5-week mandatory course to graduate in college, I would love that. So I'd like to know your thoughts on that too. And I'm sure many of us had the same upbringing where we grew up barefoot, running outside in the dirt, playing in the dirt. Some of us, like, how did we survive? How did we even make it to 18? But we did. So I'd love to hear your experiences and your thought on that paragraph as well. You know, the next paragraph that really struck me is on page 224, just the first paragraph down, and I'll read it. But I also see that when we put scientific instruments in their hands, they trust their own senses less. And when they put more energy into memorizing Latin names, they spend less time looking at the beings themselves. The students come already knowing a lot about ecosystems and can identify an impressive list of plants. But when I ask how these plants take care of them, they cannot say. And this is deep on so many levels, and I think she's referring to the relationship of just going back to reciprocity, where we don't just take and take and take. There's a give and take sort of relationship that's symbiotic, and without that symbiotic relationship, you really can't know a being unless you have that reciprocity, to know its beginning and its end, its life cycle, everything about it, its place in nature, in the world. So I believe that she's referring to that, but we'll find out more as we read. But I'd like to know what you think about that as well. So then Robin goes on to explain how with her students, they form a wigwam, and that becomes their classroom. And I want to read a little bit. It's on page 225. All 15 of us can find a comfortable seat around the perimeter. Even without a covering, it feels cozy. Few of us live in round houses anymore, where there are no walls or corners. Indigenous architecture tends to the small and round, though following the model of nests and dens and burrows and redds and eggs and wombs, as if there were some universal pattern for home. With our backs leaning against the saplings, we consider this convergence of design, a sphere that has the highest ratio of volume to surface area, minimizing the materials needed for living space. Its form sheds water and distributes the weight of a snow load. It is efficient to heat and resistant to wind. Beyond material considerations, there is cultural meaning to living within the teachings of a circle. I tell them that the doorway always faces east, and they quickly assess its utility given the prevailing westerly winds. The utility of greeting the dawn is not yet part of their thinking, but the sun will show them. This bare frame of a wigwam is not done teaching. It needs walls of cattail mats and a birch bark roof tied with spruce root. There's still work to be done. I thought that was so beautiful. And I love that she's teaching students this that are non-Indigenous. It's a lesson for all of us, not just the Indigenous. And so many people, when we tell them, oh yeah, our people, some of us still live in wigwams. Some of us live in wigwams. Let me pronounce that correctly and not get tongue-tied. We still have ceremony in wigwams. And we still have, our sweat lodges and lodges, but few of us live in wigwams full time anymore. But the lesson is about exactly what she just described. It's belonging to nature, not standing out in something that is like, oh, there's a house here. It's forming the womb, a nest, of that circle where there's no corners or edges. It's just part of nature. And I feel like this is a lesson that not just us as Indigenous people, but us as a people wanting and needing the necessary means to go back to harmony with the earth is so apparent right now. And so those little lessons of a wigwam is huge. And I'm really touched and happy that she has taught this, and it is teaching this to not only the Indigenous, but to human people. And so I really, really loved that. And it was beautiful and touched my heart. Now I'm in between 228 and 229 pages. Um, and so they've gone out onto a marsh to collect cattails. This is Robin and her botany class. And they've soon discovered that when you break apart the leaves of the cattail, it's filled with gel, almost like aloe vera. And it almost has the same qualities as aloe vera. It's good for sunburn. It's good for a lot of multiple of things. It's very good and cooling, moisturizing on your skin. So they're learning, and then they use the fibers of the cattail leaves to all sorts of things. You can weave them into sleeping mats, coverings for your wigwam, all sorts of really cool things. And they start to have the epiphany. So squeezing the soft leaves between her fingers, Natalie says, it's almost as if the plants made these things for us. The parallels between the adaptations evolved by the plants and the needs of the people are indeed striking. Native languages, in some native languages, the term for plants translates to those who take care of us. Through natural selection, the cattails developed sophisticated adaptations that increased their survival in the marsh. The people were attentive students and borrowed solutions from the plants, which increased their likelihood of survival. The plants adapt, the people adopt. And I really loved that. The plants adapt and the people adopt. And that is so deep on so many levels. I mean, our whole life, like humans, hopefully, are learning and adapting and changing and evolving. I know I certainly have. I am not the same that I was even a year ago, much less 5 years ago or 20 years ago. Totally different person. I often look back, or, memories will pop up, or you look at photographs and you're like, wow, I can't believe I was like that 20 years ago. But 20 years ago, that me probably couldn't have pictured today's me either. But thank goodness we have those lessons, because if we stayed the same, we wouldn't learn anything. And then what's the point, right? But even as we evolve and we learn and we change and we wax and wane, so do the plants and nature around us, and we just don't recognize it. But these students, after being immersed in nature and really dissecting it and studying it, start to figure that out pretty much on their own. And I thought that was really, really cool. I've had so much fun reading this chapter. She's going on these college students, and how, so basically for 5 weeks, they are surviving in nature around this marsh area and water area. They've listed their needs, food, water, shelter, and then they've even gone on to like, well, we need music and comfort and this sort of thing. There's one kid that lists an iPod as his necessary items to survival. But then they go into the marsh. They've collected the cattails, and they've even started to call it Wall Marsh in place of Walmart. I thought that was adorable. Anyway, so now they have found the cattails that they use for food, and so many really cool things. But the older cattails that are brown, we've all seen them, and then the seeds just come off and they're super fluffy, and that's how they spread. But there's other uses to that, of course. And I loved this paragraph. I hear shouting and I see clouds of fluff drifting on the air, so I know that the students have reached Wall Marsh Aisle 3. Each tiny flower matures to a seed attached to a plume of fluff, making up the familiar cattail, a handsome brown sausage at the end of the stalk. At this time of year, wind and winter have picked away at them until they are just wads like cotton batting. The students tear it from the stalk and stuff it into sacks, destined for pillows or bedding. Our foremothers must have been grateful for a thick marsh. One of the names for cattail in the Potawatomi language is Bewiskwinuk, meaning we wrap the baby in it. Soft, warm, absorbent. It was both insulated and diaper. I just loved that. And, I learned that word a long time ago, but, if you don't use it, you lose it. And I clearly need to use it more. So just being reminded of that was beautiful. And I love the way that Robin interacts with her students and I would love to take one of her classes, and I'm 46, but I would love it so much. So like all of Robin's teachings, she has to get real, and she starts to lay down some facts and reality on page 231. And this is speaking about the marshland. Not surprisingly, hunger for this productive land precipitated a 90% loss of the wetlands, as well as the native people who depended upon them. Cattails are also soil builders. All those leaves and rhizomes return to the sediments when the cattails die back. What hasn't been eaten lies beneath the water, only partially decomposing in the anaerobic waters, building up peat. It is rich in nutrients and has the water holding capacity of a sponge, making it ideal for truck crops. Decried as wastelands, marsh draining for agriculture was carried out on huge scales. So-called muck farms plow under the black soil of drained marshes, and a landscape that once supported some of the world's highest biodiversity now supports one single crop. In some places, the old wetlands are just paved over for parking, a true waste of land. So like I love how she balances out a lot of fun and then education and reminiscing, but then she keeps it real too. These are the facts, and this is what happened, and these are consequences. And yeah, people came in. You think about New York City, Manhattan. What was that like before New York City was Manhattan? It was marshland. It was all waterways, tons and tons of waterways and islands. And New York City came in, and landfills filled all that in, and that all was gone. And what happened to all of that biodiversity, the ecosystems, the plant life, the fish, everything changed super quick. And when we change that fast, our surroundings, nature can't keep up with the change. And, there's consequences for that. And unfortunately, we're dealing with that now. But fortunately, we can do something about it. So now Robin and her class are moving on, and they're looking for white spruce trees to gather their roots. And I want to go over this paragraph or two. It's on page 233. And she's teaching them to look for the right spot and using intuition. Don't just start digging. You have to look and use your intuition to find the right spot on the ground. In gathering roots, just plunging in will get you nothing but a hole. We have to unlearn hurrying. This is all about slowness. First we give, then we take. Whether it's cattails or birch or roots, the students have gotten used to this pre-harvest ritual, invoking the honorable harvest. Some close their eyes and join me, and some realize it's a good time to fumble through their backpacks for a missing pencil. I murmur to the spruces who I am and why I've come. Using bits of Potawatomi and bits of English, I ask their kind permission for digging. I ask if they'll share with these dear young people what only they can give, their physical bodies and their teachings. I'm asking for something more than roots, and leave a little tobacco in return. And again, I love that she's teaching non-Indigenous the honor of harvesting, the honorable harvest. because it's something we all should be doing. And honestly, it's something that all, if not just most Indigenous societies did and still do. Even if you're not Indigenous to Turtle Island, you're Indigenous from somewhere, you've just forgotten. Um, but we all had that symbiotic relationship, but some lost it along the way. And unfortunately, that seems to be the way that the world is right now, but we can and we are going back. So I just love that she is planting those seeds with her non-Indigenous students, or maybe some are Indigenous, I don't know, maybe they don't know. But she's planting those seeds, and what they do with it is up to them, but at least those seeds are there. And I just think it's incredibly beautiful. And she's teaching us, as an Indigenous person, I'm very secretive. My generation is very secretive. My mother's generation was even more secretive. Very careful who she talked to about Indigenous ceremony or lessons or anything. Because outsiders just don't understand, or the racism and the ignorance that I saw my mother face and that I faced as well, but especially my mom, was really hard. And watching her go through that made me even more secretive. Um, but we're coming to a time, and if you've read about the seven fire prophecies, um, you know that it's time for us to start opening up, and we need to start talking more, and we need to start learning more, we need to start listening more, but we need to stop being so closed in our ceremonies. I mean, there's time for closed ceremonies, of course, but it's teachings as far as our symbiotic relationship with the earth and each other, I think is something that shouldn't be considered a closed practice anymore. And I believe that Robin is helping us get to that point, by explaining how she teaches and her methodology and how she is learning, but because in many ways she's reconnecting as well. In fact, I think we're all reconnecting. Even if you were born and raised on a reservation, you're still reconnecting, because that, even though that might be your reservation, that may not be your homeland. For example, my res for the Citizen Band Potawatomi is in Oklahoma. Oklahoma is not our homeland. Our homeland is the Great Lakes in Michigan, upper Indiana, the upper peninsula of Michigan. That's our homeland. That's where we were forcefully removed from. So even though my res is in Oklahoma, my home is in Michigan. So even if you were born and raised on your res, that still, you're still might be having to reconnect back to your homeland. And so many of us are having to do that. And I'll tell you, the first time I stepped barefoot on the land in Michigan, I felt something I've never felt before. And I always get emotional when I remember it. It was like, oh, there you are. We've been waiting for you. And I not only heard it, I felt it through my feet all the way up to the tip of my head. I'm home. This is where I'm from, and this is where I'm supposed to be. And I love going there every year now, and I love taking my kids there. It's beautiful, and I get emotional whenever I talk about it. So there's my little tangent for a minute. We should move on and stay focused, right? Okay, now I want to read a little bit from page 237. I tell them how Darrell Thompson, a Mohawk elder and scholar, once sat with us as we made cattail baskets. It makes me so happy, he said, to see young people getting to know this plant. She gives us all that we need to live. Cattails are a sacred plant and appear in the Mohawk creation stories. As it turns out, the Mohawk word for cattail has much in common with the Potawatomi word. Their word also refers to cattails in the cradle board, but with a twist so lovely that tears spring to my eyes. In Potawatomi, the word means we wrap the baby in it. In Mohawk, it means that the cattail wraps humans in her gifts, as if we were her babies. In that one word, we are carried in the cradle board of Mother Earth. How can we ever reciprocate such a wealth of care, knowing that she carries us Could we shoulder a burden for her? I'm mulling over how to ask this when Claudia edges in with a comment that mirrors my thoughts. I don't mean this to sound disrespectful or anything. I think it's great to ask the plants if we can take them and give them tobacco, but is that enough? We're taking an awful lot of stuff. We were pretending like we were shopping for cattails, right? But we just took all this stuff without paying for it. And when you really think about it, we just shoplifted at the swamp. And she's right. If cattails are the Walmart of the marsh, then the security alarms at the exits would be blaring at our canoes full of stolen merchandise. In a sense, unless we find a way to enter into reciprocity, we are walking away with goods for which we have not paid. I remind them that the gift of tobacco is not a material one, but a spiritual gift, a means of conveying our highest regard. I've asked some elders about this over the years and heard a range of answers. One man said that gratitude is our only responsibility. He cautioned against the arrogance of thinking we have the capacity to give back to Mother Earth anything approaching what she gives us. I honor the Ebsed-Dowen, the humility inherent in that perspective. And yet it seems to me we humans have gifts in addition to gratitude that we might offer in return. The philosophy of reciprocity is beautiful in the abstract, but the practical is harder. That is something that we do need to think about. And I think the fact that they're thinking, or anyone is thinking about that as they gather resources. Like the other day I was gathering red buds and kind of thinking the same thing, like, we offer tobacco, but is that enough? Am I using everything to the full potential? Am I taking away from another animal? And for example, I mean, there's red bloods blooming all over the place, but at the same time, I'm like, am I taking from the bees who so need this at the beginning of the year? But we only take what we need. We never take more. And just, I think that acknowledgement alone makes us use less and reminds us to only take what we need. And also encourages us to pick up after ourselves, so to speak, to use less plastics, to know where things come from the base, from the source. And so the fact that any person would ask that when they're gathering is almost essential. I think if you gather without asking that question, you may be taking too much and not having that gratitude of reciprocity that is almost imperative to live in harmony. So I'm really overjoyed that other people are learning that and talking about it and discussing it, like her students are. I think that's wonderful and imperative. Okay, so we finished up with that chapter of sitting in a circle, and we're moving on to burning cascade head. And I'm just going to read a little bit from the opening. We are on page 241. Far out beyond the surf they felt it. Beyond the reach of any canoe, half a sea away, something stirred inside them, an ancient clock of bone and blood that said, it's time. Silver-scaled body, its own sort of compass needle spinning in the sea. The floating arrow turned toward home. From all directions they came, a sea of funnel of fish, narrowing their path as they gathered closer and closer until their silver bodies lit up the water. Red mates sent to sea, prodigal salmon coming home. I loved her whole poetic description of that. It was just so incredibly beautiful. And in a way, whenever I go, like I was talking earlier about going to our homeland in Michigan, it felt like that. So in a way, I felt like a salmon coming home where the needle was like, you need to go here. And I just rolled with it and went with it. I love Robin's poetic writing. I could read her words every day and feel fulfilled, I swear. Now, in this chapter, Robin starts out talking about when the salmon run comes into the waterways. You know, salmon come home from the ocean and then break off into freshwater streams and rivers to lay their eggs. And every year there's this whole ceremony. The indigenous people come out, depending which area it is, and they have a ceremony, a welcoming ceremony. The fish are our relatives. They're not just food, but they're our brothers and sisters coming home to feed us. And there's a huge ceremony, a fire, a song, there's a feast, everything. But it's important to know that as soon as the fish start coming in, they aren't harvested. I think that's something that commercial fishermen could definitely learn from indigenous people. I believe it's not until, well, and here she says, on the fourth day. I was thinking it was the third, but the fourth day of the salmon running upriver, then they can start taking the fish for food. But even that is ceremonial, and I want to read a little bit about that. Let's see. The fish course by the camp in great throngs, unmolested as they make their way upstream. Only after 4 days of fish have moved safely by is the first salmon taken by the most honored fisher and prepared with ritual care. It is carried to the feast in great ceremony on a cedar plank in a bed of ferns, and then they feast on the sacred foods, salmon, venison, roots, and berries, in sequence for their places in the watershed. They celebrate the water that connects them all in a ritual passing of the cup. They dance in long lines, singing thanks for all that is given. The salmon bones are placed back in the river, their heads facing upstream, so that their spirits might follow the others. They are destined to die as we are all destined to die, but first they have bound themselves to life in an ancient agreement to pass it on, In so doing, the world itself is renewed. And then, only then, the nets are set out. The wires are put in place. The harvest begins. Everyone has a task. An elder counsels the young one with a spear. Take only what you need and let the rest go by, and the fish will last forever. When the drying racks are full with winter food, they simply stop fishing. Wouldn't it be great if especially commercial fishermen could abide by this rule? It would just be great. I wish I had bigger, more profound words to say about that, but I just simply don't, because I guess it's exhausting. Because to me, it almost feels like a no-brainer. Like, why would you ever take more than what you need? It doesn't make sense, especially when it's life. Why would you take more and waste it? When it's life. It seems mind-boggling to me. But clearly not everyone got that education or that learning. And I wish I had the answers on how to solve that problem, but I don't. But I'd love to hear what you have to say about that, because I just I just can't articulate how I feel about that or what to do about that. So, as always, Robin's getting real, and she's talking more about the salmon's survival without an estuary. So an estuary is where saltwater and freshwater kind of mingle. And this estuary is imperative to salmon, because they can't just go from straight freshwater to saltwater, but they have to live in the saltwater. But that estuary is kind of like that halfway point to get them accustomed to both going from saltwater to freshwater and freshwater to saltwater. Without that estuary, they'll die, because they can't go just from one water source to the other. They have to have that kind of balance point to get ready for the next, almost like decompressing. So without that, it's just too much of a shock to their system. And so Robin goes on to explain more about problems that the salmon, our brothers, are having. Drawn by the prospect of fortunes to be made from canneries, salmon fishing exploded. But there was no more honoring of the returning fish, no guarantee of safe passage upstream for the early arrivers. Adding insult to injury, construction of upstream dams created rivers of no return, and degradation by cattle grazing and industrial forestry reduced spawning to nil. The commodity mindset drove fish that had fed the people for thousands of years close to extinction. To preserve the revenue stream, they built salmon hatcheries, turning out industrial fish. They thought they could make salmon without rivers. From the sea, the wild salmon watched for the blaze on the headland and saw nothing for years. But they have a covenant with the people and a promise to skunk cabbage to care for them, and so they came, but fewer and fewer every time. The ones that made it, though, came home to an empty house, dark and lonely. There were no songs or fern-decked tables, no light on the shore to say welcome back. According to the laws of thermodynamics, everything has to go someplace. Where did the relationship of loving respect and mutual caregiving between people and fish go? So Robin goes on. She's talking about she's walking in this place where, Native people have been removed so much, and so they're not greeting the salmon like they used to. They're brothers. And so Robin is walking this area of, it's probably a national park now or something, I don't know. So she's walking along this trail, and she says, "Instead, I just stand there, tears running down my cheeks, in nameless emotion that tastes of joy and grief. Joy for the being of the shimmering world, and grief for what we have lost. The grasses remember the nights they were consumed by fire, lighting the way back with a conflagration of love between species. Who today even knows what that means? I drop to my knees in the grass, and I can hear the sadness, as if the land itself was crying for its people. Come home, come home." There are often other walkers here. I suppose that's what it means when they put down the camera and stand on the headland, straining to hear above the wind with that wistful look, the gaze out to sea. They look like they're trying to remember what it would be like to love the world. They look like they're trying to remember what it would look like to love the world. It is an odd dichotomy we have set for ourselves between loving people and loving land. We know that loving a person has agency and power. We know it can change everything. Yet we act as if loving the land is an internal affair that has no energy outside the confines of our own head and heart. On the high prairie at Cascade Head, another truth is revealed. The active force of love for land is made visible. Here, the ritual burning of the headland cemented the people's connection to salmon, to each other, and to the spirit world. But it also created biodiversity. The ceremonial fires converted forests to fingers of seaside prairie, islands of open habitat in a matrix of fog-dark trees. Burning created the headland meadows that are home to fire-dependent species that occur nowhere else on Earth. Likewise, the first salmon ceremony, in all its beauty, reverberates through all the domes of the world. The feasts of love and gratitude were not just internal emotional expressions, but actually aided the upstream passage of the fish by releasing them from predation for a critical time. Laying salmon bones back in the stream return nutrients to the system. There are ceremonies of practical reverence. The Burning Beacon is a beautiful poem, but it is a poem written physically, deeply on the land. People love the salmon the way fire loves grass, and the blaze loves the darkness of the sea. Today we only write it on postcards. Terrific view from Cascade Head, wish you were here, and grocery lists. Pick up salmon 1.5 pounds. Ceremony focuses attention so that attention becomes intention. If you stand together and profess a thing before your community, it holds you accountable. Ceremony focuses attention so that attention becomes intention. I'm going to say it one more time. Ceremony focuses attention so that attention becomes intention. Now this is a really important segment as well. It's on page 250 and 251. To have agency in the world, ceremony should be reciprocal, co-creations, organic in nature, in which the community creates ceremony and the ceremony creates communities. They should not be cultural appropriations from native peoples. But generating new ceremony in today's world is hard to do. There are towns I know that hold apple festivals and moose mania, but despite the wonderful food, they tend toward the commercial. Educational events like wildflower weekends and Christmas bird counts are all steps in the right direction, but they lack an active reciprocal relationship with the more than human world. I want to stand by the river in my finest dress. I want to sing strong and hard and stomp my feet with 100 others so that the waters hum with our happiness. I want to dance for the renewal of the world. I can say there's so many times I feel the exact same way. So with that, I'm going to end that chapter. And so the next week we'll be doing Putting Down Roots. I'm excited for that one. And Umbilicaria, the belly button of the world. So those will be a couple fun chapters. I hope you're enjoying this as much as I am. I really look forward to this. This is, my time alone. That's just for me. I do this just for me. I don't get any benefit from that. Robin Wall doesn't sponsor me. I'm doing this just all because I love doing it, and it gives me a sense of purpose. I'm an office administrator. That's how I make a living. And so and then with COVID the last year, I don't get out much, as most of you. So this is my way to kind of reconnect, have a purpose outside of the office. And I really appreciate you all for giving me that purpose. And even though I hear from just a couple of you, I am so thrilled whenever my notification pops up that one of you have left a comment. And I hope you know how much that means. It is this little book club on social media has helped me have a purpose and expand, not only keep my brain active and my mind active as I age, but it helps me to continue to evolve and learn and hopefully become a better person. So I thank you, Chimigwich, and I hope to see you next week, and I can't wait to read what you have to say about these 2 chapters. I really look forward to it. Again, Chimigwich. Have a wonderful week, and I'll see you next week. Bamapi. For every Indigenous Author Monday video that I put out, I am dedicating it to the One Shelf Project put on by Gadakana. Gadakana is an Indigenous organization, a 501c3 nonprofit, tax-deductible organization that provides books in their local libraries that are actually accurate, historically accurate, and by Indigenous authors, both fiction and nonfiction. And their goal is to at least have a shelf dedicated to Indigenous accurate information in their local libraries. They can only do this with help through donors, and they need your help. I will put the link down here, so please check them out. The One Shelf Project, another organization near and dear to my heart. Gadakana.